Okay, this lesson is on solving polynomial equations. Polynomial equation has an exponent that's at least 2. We've already solved quadratic equations. These are going to involve exponents of 3 or more. Just like quadratic equations, we've got to make sure one side is equal to 0. Once we have the 0 on one side, we're going to use factoring. Now, most of the time you're going to be able to factor out of GCF, and you're going to have a trinomial left over or binomial left over, a difference of 2 squares. We may have to do the grouping method if you've got 4 terms. I've got a couple of examples of that. But once you get everything factored, just like with the quadratic equation, you got to set everything equal to 0 and solve for x. Sometimes when you've got quadratics, you have to use the quadratic formula. I don't have any problems like that, but it is possible that you can use that, and you have to use that in these types of problems. Okay, so number 1, it's already set to 0. So we're going to factor out a GCF, which in this case is an x. They both have x's in common. We get x squared minus 16. Now, in the parentheses is a difference of 2 squares, so we factor that. Now, everything's factored, so we're going to set all the terms equal to 0. And don't forget, if there's an x term on the outside, that means x is automatically equal to 0. This one, when we solve for x, we're going to get x equals positive 4. When we solve for x, x will be negative 4. So this is my 3 answers. Number 2 is not equal to 0, so we need to force it equal to 0. So we're going to move this over here. And remember, it changes signs when it moves across the equal sign. Alright. Now we're going to factor out GCF. In this case, GCF is a 3 and an x squared. What we're left with is x squared minus 16. Now, even though it's an x squared, since there's an x on the outside, one of my answers is 0. Wow, this is the exact same answer as number 1. This is a difference of 2 squares again, so it's just like number 1. X will be 4, and x will be negative 4. It's just a coincidence. So just pay attention. This is the same as this, so it's the same answers. Alright, number 3, it's already set equal to 0. It's a trinomial, but the first thing we're going to do is factor out GCF. In this case, my GCF is x, and I'm left with x squared minus 3x plus 4, minus 4. Now we're going to factor the trinomial. And the factors of negative 4, they have to be negative 3 or negative 4, positive 1. And again, this x on the outside means one of my answers is 0. This, when we solve it, we'll get x equals positive 4. This one will get x to be negative 1. So my 3 answers are this. Let me say this. Usually this exponent tells me how many answers I'm going to have. We got 3 answers on this one. The previous problems, number 1 was a 3, so we had 3 answers. And this was an exception. The exponent is 4, but we had 3 answers. Technically, that 0 occurs twice if you were to graph this, but we're not doing any kind of graphing. So you have the 0 basically twice, so you only list it once. So we have 3 answers over here. According to this one, we should have 3 answers. So we're going to factor this one. Now this one, everything has a 6 and an x in common, so we can factor out a 6x. We're left with x squared plus 2x minus 3. We can factor that trinomial. It's going to be x plus 3, x minus 1. So again, because there's an x on the outside, we're going to set that x equal to 0. Bring this one down. When we solve it, we're going to get x to be negative 3. This one will give me x to be positive 1. Now notice the sign changes once we solve it. If it's positive on the inside, it becomes negative on the outside. That's always true when you're solving these quadratic and polynomial stuff. Alright, I want to do a couple of problems that involve 4 terms, and that's going to involve the grouping method. So this goes back to factoring way back in chapter P. First thing I've got to do though is make it equal 0, so I've got to move these 2 terms over to the left. And remember, when you move them over, the signs will change. So we get minus 9x plus 27. Alright. Remember the grouping method. Draw your 2 sets parentheses with plus sign. First 2 terms in the first parentheses. Then the second 2 terms in the second parentheses. And we're going to factor out the GCF of each parentheses. This parentheses, both the numbers are divisible by 4, and they have an x squared in common. When I divide, I'm going to get x minus 3. Now we've got to remember, we got to make this parentheses match the x minus 3. Now, because there's a negative sign in front, the GCF is negative. In this case, it's negative 9. So we're left with x minus 3 in the parentheses. So the x minus 3 is part of my factored answer. The other part is the 4x squared minus 9. So we're going to have 4x squared minus, 4x squared, 4x squared minus 9. Okay, pay attention. This is a difference of 2 squares. It will factor into 2x minus 3, 2x plus 3. Okay, this one, when we set it equal to 0, we're going to get x to be positive 3. So that's one of my answers. Now I'm going to come over here to the side, and I'm going to take the 2x minus 3, set it equal to 0, and the 2x plus 3 and set it equal to 0. So this one, I move the negative 3x over, it becomes positive 3. Divide by 2, so x will be 3 halves. That's another answer. This one, when I subtract 3 from both sides, we'll get negative 3 on the left, on the right. 2x will be negative 3. Divide by 2, so we get x to be negative 3 halves. There's my 3 answers. So you've got to remember the grouping method if you get 4 terms. Let's do another grouping method. I've got to move these 2 terms over to the left. We're going to have 3x squared, 3x cubed, plus 2x squared, minus 12x plus 8. Then we put the first 2 terms in the first parentheses, second 2 terms in the second parentheses. Again, it's just like the other one. We're going to be able to factor out a a negative GCF on the second parentheses, but the first one, we're going to factor out an x squared, and we're left with 3x plus 2. Now this one, we got to figure out what they have in common. The 12 and the 8 have a 4 in common, so we're going to factor out a negative 4 because that's negative. So we're going to be a negative 4, and we're left with positive 3x minus 2. So that means that 3x minus 2, 3x, hold on, I made a mistake up here. That should be a minus because I jumped it across the equal sign. Yeah. Caught my mistake. So it's going to be 3x plus 3x plus 2. Second part of the answer will be the x squared minus the 4. We'll have x squared minus 4. And again, this piece is the difference of 2 squares, so we're going to have 3x plus 2 times x minus 2 plus x plus 2 equals 0. These are the easy ones. When I solve these, I'll get negative 2 and positive 2. So that's 2 answers. Now we're going to go set the 3x plus 2 equal to 0, solve for x. I'm going to move the positive 2 over, which makes it negative 2. When I divide by 3, we get x to be negative 2/3. So that's my third answer.